Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Conscious Curiosity. I'm your host, Robert Bauer. Joining us today is Danny Wilten. Danny is an analyst, alchemist, symbolist, and hermeticist. We'll be discussing his research regarding the Orion Nebula and the mystery that is associated with the Orion constellation found in indigenous cultures all over the world that dates back to ancient Egypt. Danny talks about man's connection to the Orion Nebula and its association to the human body and consciousness. We'll talk about the mystery of how the Orion Nebula has been subconsciously depicted by some of the greatest masters in religious art, including Michelangelo, El Greco, Bernini, and others. Yet this intimate knowledge of the Orion Nebula found mysteriously in these paintings precedes the discovery of the telescope and would still require technology that rivals some of our most powerful telescopes today. Joining our discussion today is fellow truth seeker David Goshorn. So sit back and enjoy a fascinating discussion of discovery with Danny Wilten on Conscious Curiosity.
My approach that I took was to move into this stuff. You know, I'm an analyst. I'm a systems analyst. That's what I do for a living.
Yeah, you've been a tech guy forever, haven't you?
Right. But the way that we do things is different. It's different than the way that I would say these astrophysicists. The first thing that they want to do is they want to throw math to everything. And what they end up doing is they work themselves into a tizzy over something, and then they find out that they're wrong about it because of their math. And that's not the approach that a systems analyst takes. A systems analyst looks at things from a very hierarchical way of looking at things. So we start at the very top and we look for the common sense things, right? And then if something looks like it's common sense, then we break it down into its smaller pieces.
And you're kind of learn to think that way, don't you? Like an outline, sort of.
Exactly. We break it into a tree. So you won't see me breaking out hardcore math on something before I look at it and see if it actually makes sense. And see, this is the crazy thing about the Orion Nebula. See, they say that the Orion Nebula is 2 or 3 million years old, but then they gave age and distance. They gave age and distances for all the stars in the Orion constellation between here and these different stars, and they never ever took 1 second to look at these stars and realize that when you calculate all this out, that the stars versus their age to the distance of the Earth is a smooth line working its way all the way back to the Orion Nebula. And not only that, they follow this Fibonacci spiral that goes all the way back to the Orion Nebula. And they completely missed it because they worked themselves into a tizzy over all this hardcore math, and they didn't use their common sense. So this is what I'm talking about. So we look at things at a kind of a common sense level. So I did things with imagery and symbolism, and I took that approach because you always hear people bitching at each other all the time about what this says versus what that says and what it means or what have you. I said, look, there's got to be a better way. Right. I said, there's got to be a better way to figure this stuff out than to. And so what I thought about, I was like, well, okay, so what are these people talking about? Well, they're talking about visions that they had. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to start looking at some of the imagery inside of these cathedrals, because back in the 1500s, or I would say somewhere around the late 1400s and all the way up until the mid 1750s, the art was just incredible. This is before I was getting into the hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt and stuff. But
and that's before television, right?
What's that?
That's before television, so they had to find something to do, right?
Right, but it was also still when they were also still. I'm sorry. I'm still thinking from a serious point of view. I didn't catch that.
I told you it was coming, Danny.
So all the symbolism was all over these churches. Now, here's what happened. It was actually by accident that all this occurred. I have two computer screens that sit on my desk. And one screen, I had the Orion Nebula, for whatever reason, I don't remember why. and it was an infrared version of it. And I'm flipping through images of cathedrals on the other screen, and I came across this one called Karlskirche, which is this cathedral high altar. And this church is located in Vienna, Austria, and they built this thing in 1737. And when I came to the high altar, I can't remember exactly what I did. If I went up to get something to drink and I came back, but at some point I noticed that there was an extreme similarity between what I was looking at on one screen and the other, and then I was like, I started looking at it a little bit hard. I was like, wow, this can't be possibly true, because we have the same sunburst going on both of them, and we have the same general outline. So I started looking at all the pieces. Now, the way I describe this for anybody else out there, if you want to be able to know that you're looking at the same thing, how do you do it? Well, the first thing is you look at the whole overstructure of it. This is kind of the way that shape recognition would work as well. You look at the whole general shape of it, but that's not good enough, right? You need to know the internal parts of it. So you start breaking it into smaller sections, and you start comparing those sections. And the things you have to take a look at are the XY coordinates, the relative size, location, its rotation, and all of these various things. And I noticed that as I was doing that, that these various shapes were in the same XY location. They were rotated the same and everything. And then I was like, wow, these things are matching up. And then I thought to myself, I thought I was like, but this can't be true, because this was done in 1737, and this is an infrared image of the Orion Nebula.
Have you seen the intercession of Borromeo? I was looking at that one too, and you had shown some other ones. And, I just popped it back up on my screen, and it's, if you look at you basically on the left side of the screen, it's supported by the Virgin Mary. I'm trying to look at the image code right here, but it's the trapezium, or, whatever you're going to, see in this. There's actually, the head of the Virgin Mary right in the middle of it. It's another one I'm looking at right now as I'm kind of popping through this artwork as you're talking.
That reminds me, what you're describing sounds a lot like the Ascension of Christ by Salvador Dali.
The arm of Charles Borromeo is the right side of the Nile Delta, and the cherub and the robe of the Virgin Mary kind of goes up on the left, and then her head is right in the middle.
Yeah.
And there it is, popping right up.
Right. What I started noticing, though, is I was like, well, okay, I was like, great, you got a great hypothesis here, but this could have been a lucky deal. And so what I did was I thought, well, I've got enough accuracy here to warrant a little bit more investigation. So I began to start looking for it in other places, and I found that it was being depicted in these various ways in these various cathedrals. What I also noticed that tied it all together was the theme was always the same. So in the Mother Jesuit Church, which I'm sure they can't stand it that this is right in the middle of their church, but if you go into their cathedral and you look straight up in the air, at the very top you have something called Triumph of the Name of Jesus. Now this is really interesting, because these various symbols are always labeled something. And so in Karlskirche, it was labeled the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, and that was associated to the trapezium. Now, when we go into the Mother Jesuit Church, the Church of the Jesu, and you look straight up, you see this thing called Triumph of the Name. It's a huge fresco done by Giovanni Battista Galli, and it shows all of these people on this cloud, and this cloud is circling into the middle of the bright spot. It's almost like the ladder of souls moving into when we think of Jacob's ladder, the angels ascending to heaven on this ladder.
Right.
So what I found out that this cloud is actually the Barnard's Loop circling into the Orion Nebula. And when I performed the overlay, it was absolutely amazing. And of course, the Orion Nebula is right in the center of it. And this time, it's labeled IHS, which is an older acronym for Jesus. So I continue, and I'm finding it in other areas. And the next time, I find it in the Vatican City in St. Peter's chair. This got two parts to this, because this time the symbolism He's showing the Holy Spirit dove, but it's the same thing. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. All of Vatican City is the same structure as Solomon's Temple. Guess where, when you lay the human body on top of all of it, where the head is? The head is sitting right on top of the dome of the temple where the Orion Nebula is. So that means the Orion Nebula, once again, is associated to the head. And by the way, Bernini did all of this, but he's got the head where it's sitting right on top of where the holiest of holies is on Solomon's Temple, right where the Orion Nebula is, right underneath it, and right where the head is.
And could you clarify where that was, which church that was in? Cathedral?
It's St. Peter's Basilica.
St. Peter's. Okay, gotcha. Just so everybody kind of has an idea.
It's the one that you always see when you think of the altar inside the Vatican. It's the one with the sunburst and the holy dove.
It has the major sunburst right there, just blasting out with all the cherubs around it and everything.
Right, that is the Orion Nebula.
Creepy, but you're right.
That's right where the head is when you overlay the body on top of Vatican City.
Danny, would this make sense to you? There's a universal mind where all of the information is available and accessible to those who choose to access it. There are those who do it consciously and purposefully. There are those who are just naturally connected to it. And I think of savants in some cases where they have immediate, amazing skills that you wouldn't think that they could because of whatever handicap they may have within themselves, whether it's a sensory or a physical or a mental, but kind of like Kim Peek, the Rain Man movie was based on, just has amazing consciousness skills that he wouldn't normally have. So that's where people are connecting naturally. There's a natural connection to this universal mind. And then there are those who pursue it. And then there are those who are just fractals bouncing around as a result of the universal mind that is there constantly with everyone. So this knowledge that you're talking about, the Orion Nebula, the trapezium, how it's been replicated throughout eons and different civilizations on Earth, in the symbology, in the language. Some of those individuals in various cultures and civilizations were purposely connected and had that knowledge and either kept it to themselves or took it and did their own morphing to it and then bestowed it upon the people to control them, while others would just find this information through this natural connection that everybody can have if they're open to it, like a Walter Russell, for example. If that's the case, if this universal mind is always there and the information is always there, and there are those who can connect naturally, those who connect purposefully, what is the connection to that information as it relates to Orion and the Orion Nebula?
All of the information that is out there, we are all fragments of the Orion Nebula, okay? And so we're all pieces of the mind that comes from the Orion Nebula. The Orion Nebula, what it is the first man, okay? It's the first man called Adam. The ancient Egyptians in their Gnostic texts, they called him Adamus. And Adamus was born from the infinite. So when the infinite wanted to create, he caused creation through a word. The word is a combination of vibration and thought together. That created the word mind, which is the large pillar, which is the black hole. When creation happens, that's the first thing that happens is the pineal gland. And the first light that is created, where the man comes into being, is his soul. It's because the soul represents the identification of that particular being. So that particular being at that point he saw himself in the reflection of the waters. And what happened is this was the fall. The fall was not something that has anything to do with anything evil. He fell into his own thought and went into nature and fragmented his whole consciousness up into the world and everybody that was on it. So it's actually kind of like a matrix that we live in. We all exist within one computer program, but that computer program is not a computer program, it's a mind. So he is going through a process right now where he fell from his original spiritual nature because we were all part of Adam. He fell from his spiritual nature into the material world. So things are going to come out all over the planet, whether it be geography, whether it be art. And when you begin to look for it, you begin to see that these are all connected to the same area because we're talking about the same mind that is fragmented its consciousness into the whole world and all of humanity. The whole point of all this is man descends and then he ascends again back up to his original state. So the whole point is for humanity, it's almost like a learning process he has to go through.
What went on there, Danny? Do you think that was the inspiration for that? Was it a supernova or something like that, or were they sensing some sort of huge change in the Orion Nebula when all this came about?
What are you talking about?
Like Adam, and was that sort of like the latest?
No. It has nothing to do with that, Dave.
Right.
This is just the infinite wanting to create, and what it does is
like a desire.
Right. And when it creates, the first thing it creates is a black hole. So that black hole represents the mind of our reality. Mind begins to divide within itself. Okay, it begins to create patterns. It begins to divide and divide until it divides itself into all of the stars, worlds, and planets and everything that it makes. But all of that is still part of its same mind, and the whole Earth and everybody that's on this Earth are fragments of this one mind that was created by the infinite. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, man. It's just an amazing thought.
This is the reason why geography matches the area. It's the reason why the whole world matches the area. And even if you read the ancient texts, the Popol Vuh by the Mayans, they talk about heart of sky. Heart of sky is Orion. Okay, and they talk about the one-legged one, the hurricane. Well, the one-legged one is the Orion constellation. You take a look at the Fibonacci spiral. It's one leg that comes out from the center, which is the Orion Nebula. So, and they talk about when creation happened that he thought, and it came, and he thought about the trees, he thought about the oceans, he thought about the mountains. This is what they talk about in the mind Popol Vuh. And he thought about the mountains, and the mountains come. He thought about the trees, and the trees come. Right? That's what happened. It's about thinking. It's about mind. And this is also what we hear about in the ancient Egyptian cultures as well. When things began, they thought about them because it's all about mind. When Hermes talks about his vision, and he's talking to the mind, which is Poimandres, right?
Right.
And guess what? I found out recently. Manly Hall mentions that someone says that the mind of the universe was Osiris in Hermes' vision, and Osiris is Orion. So
how does that maybe equate to Osiris being torn into pieces? Would that have something to do with something you've noticed in Orion?
That's an allegory.
Yeah, just an allegory or metaphor.
I think that's an allegory. Yeah, it's just it probably has something to do with the various spiritual aspects. See, and a lot of people, they talk about well, what about the heart? And stuff like that. Well, all of those are reflections of the mirror of mind. Everything is actually mind. All the chakras are in the brain.
Right.
And all of the areas of the body are reflections of those chakras in the brain, because everything divides from a certain point, and that certain point begins in the brain area when we think of it symbolically. And we have to think of everything symbolically because all of physical reality is just symbols anyway. It's all symbolic.
Pictures, and we've attached text to it to complicate it.
The only way that we can put meaning to anything is to see it, really, most of the time.
Well, and to put some kind of name on it, which becomes an archetype, over time,
we have
right?
to put a name on it in a meeting, and so that we start thinking of pictures. Now, obviously, people who can't see don't do this; they do it a different way. But the thing is that when I begin talking about this, I see images in my head, and awesome, I will have to say that the approach that I took to begin looking at all this stuff, I think, was the right way to go. A lot of people, when they begin to explore this stuff, they're interested in the words, they're interested in the text. What do the books have to say? And the problem with that is that what we're really talking about is we're talking about people that have visions. And what are visions? Well, visions are images. So what they're doing in a lot of these ancient texts is they're describing what they saw. So if you learn to communicate, and just as Manly Hall mentions as well, through symbolism and through things, and this is one of the reasons why the Freemasons are very much into symbolism. They get it. They understand the importance of the symbolism because it all comes from, if you want to understand what's going on, you go to the source of it. And the source of it, the only way that you can really communicate directly with whatever this mind is through the images, because that's God and creation.
And aren't those images based
Standing
on
out.
this geometry at a base and even sacred geometry as we've come to know it?
Absolutely, but the ultimate key is man. Man is the key, because when you begin to take a look at all of the geography, okay, let me give you an example. The whole world, okay, the whole world is actually, if we take a look at the Nile Delta itself, the Nile Delta itself is an image of the triangular area that surrounds your pineal gland. So if you back out far enough on Earth, you see that same brain or that same face in right profile that's mentioned all over Jewish mysticism. It's always a person facing in right profile. It's always what they talk. And this is exactly what I found a long time ago before I read the texts. I kept telling everybody, and this is what I like about YouTube, is I've got all these videos showing that, look, damn it, this is what I see. And everybody says, you're crazy, Danny, you're crazy. And now I was like, I see a person in right profile right here. So here later on, I get into the Jewish mysticism, and what do I read? The Ancient of Days is faced in right profile. And this is the way we see it. These are the exact same things I kept coming up with. So here we go.
The overlays you've done are really describing that well. You know, when people watch your videos, they might at first say, boy, they look kind of complicated, but you know, then you start shifting in between the imagery, and you know, I don't know how anybody can't see it.
Well, the key factor of this is when I discovered what Michelangelo did with the creation of Adam, because it wasn't just the excitement that he had painted the Orion Nebula. I had already seen the Orion Nebula before in Karlskirch, in the Vatican, Chair of St. Peter, in St. Mary's Cathedral, in all of these. But what he did, which the other ones didn't do, is he added the human factor to it. And he showed me that the Orion Nebula is a brain or person faced in right profile.
Yeah.
Now this
he has those. The arms are just outstretched. It's almost like a comforting.
Well, what he did with the arms is he created the internal part of the brain with God's arm. That's the corpus callosum. That's the corpus callosum coming around, and then of course, but so once I figured out that he painted a brain, I was like, oh, you know, now I get it. It's about man. It's about man.
It looked a little
and so
creepy
then I immediately understood the Orion Nebula is a brain. And then when I saw Egypt and the Nile Delta, and that the Nile Delta matched the Orion Nebula, then I realized, oh my God, there's a brain on the Earth too. And then I realized that the whole Nile and the Nile Delta is a representation of man in a smaller fractal form.
It looks just like a brain stem, and you know, the Nile is the spinal column and everything.
Right, but here's the catch.
Early on were amazing.
See but take a look at the fractal thing that's going on here, okay? Because you have the Nile coming all the way up, which is actually the spinal cord, and when you get up to the Nile Delta, that's the whole head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
But that's the whole head. But yet, from a larger perspective, then what you're talking about is just the triangular area that surrounds the pineal gland of a larger brain. Right. So you have this fractal thing going on from the very small to the very large, and it's the same image.
Now, is that the reptilian brain that you're talking about? Is that what that's called, that area?
No. Have you ever seen the images that the ancient Egyptians show where they show somebody standing in the middle of a larger tree?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
And where do they place their heads? They place their whole heads inside, right in the middle, where the pineal gland would be of the larger tree. Right? Because the large tree that they're standing in the middle of is actually another brain.
So that's the fractal nature of that.
So you have the smaller guy. It's kind of hard to think of because you have to think of these things fractally. I want you to think of, what do they call those fractals, those that you can zoom in and they keep looking like they're the same thing?
Mandelbrot's?
Yes,
Mandelbrot patterns.
Yeah.
That's what I want you to put. That's the kind of thing I want you to put in your head, okay? Mm-hmm. So we've got this brain that we're zooming in on in right profile, and when we get to where we can see the triangular area surrounding the pineal gland, then you see another little head in the distance in the middle of it pop up, and you can start zooming in on it, and the same thing happens over and over again. So you have this large to smaller to smaller to smaller, and this fractal, and this is where the Fibonacci spiral comes in. Because what you see is that each pass of the spiral creates a larger image of the same thing. Mm-hmm. So what I figured out was when your center point, which is right in the middle of the Nile Delta, which is Busiris, which is the house of Osiris. what I found out was that since that's the center of the vortex and the center of the pineal gland, and this is where creation began, right? So that's the center of your vortex. When you expand that Fibonacci spiral out, and when I say expand it, I mean scale it. You keep your aspect ratio. So that's the center of the vortex, and when you move it out to where the bottom part of it is passing right by the coccyx or the sacrum, the end of the very coccyx area, then you find that the division point exists right between the head and the body. So you're dividing the head and the body. The same thing happens in smaller geometry inside the brain. As the spiral spirals out, you see that it spirals out and goes right past the corpus callosum. Now, when you spiral that out again, you'll see that you can start placing these smaller brains inside larger brains, and all of the Fibonacci spiral and its passes pass right along the geometry exactly the way that they're supposed to. This is really hard to explain if it can't show you anything. But what you find is that there's this fractal nature going on, and you can think of a Fibonacci spiral when you think of this. But you think of this image of this human or this man, which is what the Egyptians were trying to show us with the pyramid, because the pyramid represents man. And that brings me to another interesting discovery that I made recently regarding Horus. The names for Horus, he's called the only begotten of Osiris. He's called the firstborn of the infinite. He's called the door. He's called the bridge. He's also called the bridge. Right, the manly hall, and of course, nobody can get to the Father except through him.
Sounds familiar.
Exactly. Is that familiar?
Yeah.
So nobody gets to the Father except through him. He guards the house of his Father, is what is said, right? So when you begin to take a look at the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, there are the top three Sephirah, which sit at the very top. And you know how the Tree of Life looks. They're all connected by these little bars that connect all of them together. The top three have a bar that goes across horizontally, and what that does is it divides the head from the body. The name of that bar is actually called Daleth, and Daleth means door. And so when you look at the ancient Phoenician characters for door, they are a triangle. And the definition for those, as well as Hebrew, as well as Greek, they all mean tent door. And what that means, since the pyramid is the triangle and it's associated to the head, and we see this in art all over the cathedrals, the tent door is the door from the spinal cord into the base of the skull. That's what this area represents. So Horus is the door. So he is the gateway into the skull. And so he is that area. And when we put this on the Nile and the Nile Delta, the door passes right through the Great Pyramids. And that means that since Horus is guarding the house of his father, then the Sphinx that sits out there as acting as a guard, in my opinion, is a lot more than likely Horus or some other earlier version of himself.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense, Danny.
Exactly.
Yeah, doesn't it all just tie together?
Yes, and geometrically, by the way, it's also perfectly correct. And that means that the Father, which sits at Busiris, is also perfectly geometrically correct with the Sephiroths and everything when you lay everything out on the Nile. Thoth, which is also called Hermes, right? He sits in Hermopolis. And the geometry is perfectly correct.
City of Hermes. Hermopolis, the city of Hermes.
Exactly, which is where Thoth is. Now, if we take the body, the geometry of the body, and we lay it horizontally, have you guys ever seen the Judgment Hall of Osiris? You have the little guy that's down there, and if they weigh your heart against the feather of truth, and if you don't make it, then he eats you up.
The feather of truth.
Right. Okay, so there are. It's really interesting because we have a long hall, and then we have this little area, this little square area that Osiris sits in. And then all the way up to Osiris, you see all these gods. You see Anubis first, and then you see these other guys, and you see Thoth, and you see Horus. Well, what all this whole hall represents is it represents one human body. There are 33 columns of hieroglyphs that lead up to the house of Osiris, which sits at the end, which represent the 33 segments of the spinal column.
And this is all Luxor, right, Danny?
No, this is the Judgment Hall of Osiris.
Didn't you do a video on this, Danny?
Oh yeah, I've done several.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember this one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This doesn't tie in with the Luxor, the Temple of Luxor?
Well, they all tie together because they're all related to the human body.
Because that's what I'm thinking when you say there's these different chambers and these different places and all these columns. I'm, immediately thinking of the Temple of Luxor.
Well, yeah, but the Luxor the Luxor temple doesn't show the 33 columns like that.
Okay. All right.
It doesn't show the 33 columns. Now, what sits above those 33, interestingly, are 14 people sitting above it, which are the 14 parts of Osiris, right?
Right.
Now, when you take a look at everything that's going on, the heart being weighed against the feather of truth, well, who weighs the heart and who writes it all down? It's Thoth. Well, when you lay the body on top of there and the person sitting at the root, and you have Osiris at the head, Thoth is right on top of the heart. So what all this basically means is the whole Hall of Osiris hieroglyphs is showing us the representation of one body, because Osiris was actually all these various gods. People think they're all different gods in ancient Egypt, and one of the main bitches that you hear from some of the religious communities is that they worshipped all these various gods. Well, that's not true. All these various gods represented different divisions or aspects within one, which is the same as the Adam Kadmon and the Jewish mysticism, and what is actually being discussed in the opening chapters of Genesis, which is actually the heavenly Adam, which is the true interpretation and not the interpretation that the church gives everybody, which is the same thing. The heavenly Adam is the same thing as Osiris. It still points to Orion. It all comes down to the same place, same area. They're all just told differently by these various cultures. And that's the problem, is that everybody sees themselves as their religion is the best or what have you. But when you start digging in and you become an investigator and you keep an open mind instead of believing yours has to be right, but you approach it from the perspective of an investigator, you're trying to solve a crime, right? I mean, you have 100 people in the room. You don't ask, and somebody stole $5 of yours, you don't ask one person, that may be the liar. You ask everyone in the room, and you don't tell them all the story. You gather all the stories separately, and you put them together in front of you, and you see where the common truths come out. That's how you find the answers. And this is something that people refuse to do many times out there.
Right.
They don't want to compare. And that's where you do it. Now, when you think of comparing all of them together, and then you think of it through symbolism, then you see how the symbolism relates to everything. For example, what's the symbol of the holy dove? That's the Holy Spirit, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, okay, that's the same as the winged disc. That's the same as the wings on top of Hermes' staff.
Always flying or
Hermes'
taking
staff
off.
has two. Yeah, Hermes' staff. Right, and Hermes' staff has two snakes going all the way up it, and then you have wings at the very top, and then Osiris, his staff has two serpents going all the way up it, and then you have a pine cone at the top. Same thing as Dionysus. So when you begin to see all the symbolism that correlates in all of these various cultures, you start seeing, oh, so the holy dove is really the winged disc. It's just a newer version of it. And then of course, when you see what it's all related to and where it's pointed to, and then it has something to do with the head, and the head has something to do with the Orion Nebula, and the Orion Nebula, you start seeing all the connections. That's what I'm saying.
It's always somebody's Quetzalcoatl at some point, isn't it?
Yeah, these are all. That's the same representation as well.
Right.
Exactly.
So, Danny,
Everything.
basically what it sounds to me like you're a forensic semiotician looking at the symbology and understanding that the symbology may morph slightly in the way that it's represented, but from a geometry or even a fractal perspective, the archetypes are the same, but as time goes on through various civilizations and cultures, moral teachings and so forth are grafted onto these archetypes, resulting in a confusion of language and understanding, but all resulting from the same source of information and geometry.
That's right. And you can find out so much by comparing the symbolism. And it's not just the symbolism itself, but what you find is that mysteriously, somehow, they always place the symbolism associated to the right meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the winged discs, Hermes has wings on his head, right? He also has a staff with the wings at the very top. The winged disc sits at the very top of the tree of life on the Assyrian tree. The winged disc sits at the very top of the pyramid on the Egyptian Ben stone. All of these things, you'll all see, you always see that it sits at the very top. Farbahar, the Iranian guy, you see the same characteristics that you see in the Assyrian tree of life. You see the same little guy up there standing, facing to the right, same kind of geometry. And you begin to see that the placement is the same, the meanings have something to do with being the same, they're associated to a certain part of the body and man. And you begin to see how all this kind of ties together. And so the Holy Spirit that we see, that's always depicted as the dove, and of course, when you understand that we're looking at the Orion Nebula and you see it right in the very middle of Chair of St. Peter, right in that sunburst, you see it right, it's speaking of the same area.
So do you see anything similar in the Sumerian culture or in any other of the ancient civilizations?
There's a Sumerian seal. Yeah, this is interesting you brought this up because they show the winged disc on the left side of the seal. And then I don't know how people didn't catch this, David. This is, to me, amazing.
It looks like he's doing karate, though. He's got his hands up there. He's, kind of in a pose.
Well, it's the winged disc on the very left, but in the very middle, you have the 3 belt stars of Orion.
Exactly.
They're right in the.
They're right. They're vertical.
Yeah.
They're right. And so when you line Orion up to those 3 belt stars, guess where the winged disc ends up being? Right where the Orion Nebula is.
The exact spot.
That's right.
Well, and it's the right profile also really always gets me. You could have them facing both ways, all kinds of poses for the archetype of the Anthropos, but it always seems to be that perfect right profile with the arms and the hands being very important in the symbology. They don't ever leave the hands off or leave the arms off. They're always really centralized in there. That really right out in the open.
This is all mind at work. See, this is all just like I love what you wrote in that one comment on Facebook. You said something about how the forefathers knew and that they wrote this into our conscious. I forget exactly what your wording was.
It's ingrained for me. It's ingrained in our consciousness, in our DNA, in our heart, in our brains. It's
That's
just
correct.
out there.
We're dealing
like
with
an antenna.
That's right. And the archetype of Hermes is sitting right out there in the middle of, and exactly where it should be, right?
Yeah.
This is what's amazing about all this kind of stuff. But
so people
will tell you, oh, that this is pareidolia, but pareidolia is pseudoscience.
I ruled that out 3 years ago when I first watched one of your first 2 or 3 videos. After the Kabbalion, which of course that was the one that I watched first, and thought you did really, really excellent job on that. Like your second or third video, I totally ruled pareidolia out because I've done some of the moon anomalies and all that crap, and looked on there to see if I could see gears on Mars or whatever. But this is something totally different than that. I think this is like I said, it's ingrained. It's something that.
Well, you know what I did,
you're
David,
just ready to receive it.
I realized after a while the only way I was going to get people to shut up about all that was to throw the geometry on there. So that's what I did. I picked up the Flower of Life, and I began to look at the geometry. And what that's actually done is helped me out a lot more in some ways, because by burning that symbol into your head, you begin to see it in nature.
It's just everywhere. I mean, when I'm fishing or whatever, I see it in the whirlpools, and when I'm out looking at conch shells, because we live in Florida, everything I see here in Florida, all the flowers and the plants, everything conforms to that sacred geometry. There's no mystery about it. It's a fact, and every morning I wake up and I see it all over again in the backyard, and when I go out in the water.
The thing is if you want to open up that area in your head to allow you to see the stuff like this, you have got to burn these symbols into your head, and that's the approach that I took.
So, Danny, we've covered an amazing amount of information, just fascinating. I've been sitting back here in my chair, actually, just closing my eyes and listening and visualizing.
I hope I'm not making your eyes glaze over.
No, that's why I closed them. No, seriously.
Mine are semi-glazed over. I'm trying hard.
Putting together the imagery in my mind based on your descriptions has just been an absolute joy. And I couldn't have done some of the connections in my own mind had I not seen some of your work. And your work is just phenomenal. And people who do have an open mind, who are actually looking for facts, not hyperbole or some made up mythos to support some particular agenda, regardless of where that agenda comes from. People who really want to find the truth about what is there, what can be seen, will find it in your work. One of the things I wanted to ask you, what has changed in your mind and your way of seeing the world around you as a result of the work that you've done? I mean, this is some profound stuff.
I guess I've become a completely different person as far as understanding what we're here for, and I understand now that we are all really the same being. We're all one person, and when you think of it from that perspective, you're thinking, why are you fighting with yourself?
Why are we killing one another?
Well, it's not that it's killing is bad. It's pointless.
Sure.
You're one mind having an experience through all of humanity.
It's like we're dying cells.
The only way that you can do good for that mind is to try to bring everybody else together. When you think of a problem in your head, how do you solve the problem? Well, this is kind of the way I kind of use this analogy. You solve the problem by beginning to divide the problem up into its parts, and you take different sides. You go, well, and you almost create an argument in your head. You take one side and you go, yeah, but what about this? But then you take the other side and you go, yeah, but we've got this part about, and you're dividing yourself up mentally into these different perspectives, and you're trying to work the problem out, right? And when you come to the solution of the problem, they all come back together and the problem is solved. So the only way that we are doing the good around on this planet is to first come to the realization that we are all one being. When we destroy the earth, when we destroy anything out there, when we're not doing something to better all of humanity, then all we're really doing is hurting ourselves in the long run, because we're all part of the same being. The only way that we get out of this mess is to come together. And that means to treat everything in humanity and the whole planet as being one being, like we're the same person. And I'm not saying this because it sounds neat. It's because I know we're all one person. And this is what's changed me, because now I see myself as a servant of humanity rather than a servant of myself.